Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. Well, my guest today, Russ Feingold, represented the state of Wisconsin in the United States Congress for 28 years, including 18 as a senator, before losing a re-election campaign in 2010 to a Tea Party-backed Republican businessman. Now, Feingold, a liberal Democrat, became a hero to many progressives for voting against the Patriot Act in the wake of the September 11th terrorist attacks, and also for his role helping spur campaign finance reform. Less known, perhaps, was Feingold's long service as chairman of a Senate subcommittee on Africa. Now, today he's bringing his expertise on that continent to bear in a new role as Secretary of State John Kerry's hand-picked special envoy to the Great Lakes region of Africa. Now, his remit? To oversee U.S. policy in a very troubled region that spans Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, caught up in a devastating civil war. Now, Feingold's recently back from his first official visit to the region as a U.S. Special Envoy, a 9-day trip. We have been all consumed here in Europe, in the U.S. with the Syria crisis. We barely talk about Africa, and we barely talk about this war, and yet it's really the deadliest war in Africa's modern history.
That's right, and it is a terribly difficult thing to make priorities in such a complicated modern world. But the ignoring or failure to give adequate attention to Africa is something that is not only terrible for Africa, but frankly for the rest of the world. And I'm pleased that President Obama and Secretary of State Kerry have shown a new commitment to at least have the United States play a real role in trying to deal with what you've correctly said is one of the greatest human tragedies, not only in Africa, but in the entire world. Over 5 million people have died in the last 20 years as a result of this conflict in the eastern Congo.
I'm sorry, you just said 5 million.
And so it's high time it gets more attention.
That's just
right.
said over...
So you put together, that's right. If you put together the tragedies, and they are enormous tragedies, in places like Darfur and the Balkans and things that have happened in Cambodia, you could put many of those together in terms of the number of people that have been killed, and it would actually be less than what has happened in the Congo. And that's to take nothing away from those tragedies. But in addition to that, in the eastern Congo, we have a terrible phenomenon of the conscription of child soldiers. We have almost an unprecedented and unspeakable violence against women, really war crimes against women. So this is a crisis that requires our moral attention, but also from the point of view of just the national security of the United States and European countries and others, to allow a region to be racked by this kind of armed conflict among illegal armed groups invites all the bad elements that wish us harm in the world. So from many points of view, this requires much greater attention.
Now, for a long time, a lot of the problem was a lot of these rebel movements, they sort of swept in and acted with impunity. We've had since March, correct me if I'm wrong, a sort of new intervention brigade, a UN-backed intervention brigade of peacekeepers. How is that working out? Have they actually had to intervene yet on the ground? Have they stopped rebels from actually fighting or moving in on targets?
Yes, actually, there's been a good result recently. The first thing to remember is that the basis for this peace effort is a framework that was signed, Peace, Security, and Cooperation Framework, signed in February. So the goal of the military force in Eastern Congo is first and foremost peacekeeping. But you're right that in addition to that, it was approved by the United Nations and accepted by the countries in the area that there be a intervention brigade created that would have the ability to be more proactive in dealing with these some 40 to 45 illegal armed groups in the area. Recently, there was a problem with the so-called M23 group in Eastern Congo being aggressive and moving toward the city of Goma in Eastern Congo. And the intervention brigade with the MONUSCO peacekeeping forces and the Congolese military together successfully pushed them back.
Let me ask you.
So it was an initial test. It was tough fighting, but it did do a good job, and I'm hoping they're going to be able to do that with some of the other armed groups to show that it's balanced and even-handed.
Let me ask you about that rebel group. You mentioned it, M23 they're called. Now, your recent trip that we were talking about included a visit to the Rwandan capital, to Kigali, and you met there with Rwanda's President Paul Kagame. Rwanda's been blamed for sending those rebels across the border to fight Hutu militias in Congo, in the eastern reaches of Congo. Rwanda abetting this war. Did you speak to the president of Rwanda about that? Did you raise that issue?
I did. I spoke to the president. I spoke to the foreign minister, the defense minister, and repeated our concern that there's a credible body of reporting that Rwanda has given some support of certain kinds to the M23. So we communicated that. But we also communicated it to other countries in the region about supporting other armed groups. For example, we made it very clear to the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, President Joseph Kabila, that there should be no support for the so-called FDLR. Now, that's the group that Rwanda is very concerned about because they are connected historically to the genocide that occurred in Rwanda. So we said to President Kabila, just as we said to President Kagame about the M23, no cooperation between the Congolese military and this FDLR, and that they have to prosecute people who do that. So what's critical here is that the message that I and the other special envoys brought was a consistent message of no country in the region should be providing any support whatsoever to these armed groups. And in fact, these countries signed this framework agreement. This isn't the UN or the United States or the EU telling them this. This is their own agreement that they signed in February to not tolerate this kind of violence in the eastern Congo.
But with all due respect, sir, Rwanda, for example, has categorically dismissed these allegations that it's backing these rebels. What do you do if they just a blanket denial? You bring this message and they say, but we're not doing this. We're not supporting these groups.
Well, we keep saying it. We keep telling them that we believe it to be the case. We want them to suggest to us evidence that proves that they will not be doing it in the future. And of course, we're always open to further proof that it has not happened. But our belief is that it has. And there are options there that are available if that continues, because this violates the framework that was signed by Rwanda. And if necessary, there are steps that can be taken. But we are trying to exert at this point positive pressure on Rwanda, on Congo, all the countries in the region who have expressed strong support for the framework that prevents this kind of support. And specifically, there are talks going in Kampala, in that area, in Uganda, that are related to at least trying to deal with this M23 problem in the short run. In the long run, though, through the framework, we need broader negotiations where Rwanda and the other countries are all at the table to make sure that not only are these armed groups disarmed, but that a country like Rwanda could feel confident that the Eastern Congo will be properly governed and have a credible military so that these kind of groups can't live and operate and terrorize the people of the region.
Ethnic violence, I don't have to tell you this, is still rife across a great part of that region. Do you ever fear when you visit this area that we could see a revival of that Rwandan genocide you mentioned earlier? 800,000 lives were lost. Hutus against Tutsis. It's still all there on the surface, isn't it? Or just below?
Well, and the problem is that is one of the tensions, but there are so many different ethnic tensions in the region that if anybody tries to exploit ethnic hostilities or feelings, it can be a tinderbox situation that can affect, it's already greatly affecting Eastern Congo, and many people have died because of the conflict, but there is always the possibility in a place like Rwanda or Burundi of the traditional ethnic tensions coming back and causing violence. So the goal here is to get beyond that. I believe the presidents of all these countries really don't want to have this kind of ethnic tension. They want to be able to govern their countries. They want to be able to have economic development for their countries. So the goal here is to make sure that there is no incitement to ethnic violence or tension, but also we want this process to provide opportunities for the positive side, for economic development.
And that's the key.
The World Bank, as a part of this framework process, said that they would put down $1 billion of economic development for the region if we can make a part of this process, of course, a peaceful situation where this economic development can occur. So this isn't just about stopping the fighting, which of course is always number one, but it's about a broader vision of these countries have significant resources. If the world would stop exploiting those resources and instead help these countries to work together to provide a life for the people of their country that they deserve, and frankly that they've been denied for over 100 years
for a long time
due to abuses that occurred during the colonial era.
Sir, this is a daunting challenge. I mean, from everything you're saying, I just want to shift back, though, to the United States. I mean, right now, anyone on the outside looking in would say that they're seeing a more isolationist mood in the U.S., a more sort of turning inward type of movement. You would seem, given everything you've just told me, to have an extremely daunting task trying to get people to focus on a place so remote, so far away, and proving that there's some vital U.S. interest involved there.
Well, you know, one of the problems we've had, and I experienced this when I was in the Senate, is we got involved in some situations in the last 10 years that we shouldn't have gotten involved in, and it's caused the American people to be more negative about involvement overseas than perhaps they normally would be. The good news is that this crisis, this terrible crisis, is one that I think doesn't involve those political disputes. I was at a breakfast with UN Special Envoy Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, yesterday at the U.S. Congress. We had a group there, a bipartisan group, some of the most conservative members of the Congress, some of the most liberal. We sat down together with her, and we had a wonderful conversation about the joint efforts we can make together to bring attention to this region. So this is an exception to what you're seeing. I believe the United States is prepared on a bipartisan basis to work to help solve this problem under African leadership. And I think you're going to find that this could be an example of maybe how we could get ourselves out of this hole of looking at the rest of the world in a way that doesn't really fit the American responsibility. We have a responsibility as one of the leading countries in the world to be involved in these sort of situations. And I believe my president, President Obama, and the Secretary of State, John Kerry, have signaled a strong American desire to help solve this problem by allowing me to do this job and by supporting the framework at the United Nations. And I, frankly, am very pleased that they've shown that leadership.
Russ Feingold, unfortunately, we will have to leave it there. This is a topic that obviously takes a lot more than 11 and a half minutes to really delve into. But I appreciate you being on the show today. U.S. Special Envoy to the Great Lakes region of Africa, a very war-torn, troubled region, to say the least. And you are the hand-picked envoy for U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. Thanks for talking to us today about your recent visit there. And thanks to all of our viewers here on France 24.